Museums and Cultural Arts Commission on Thursday, May 4. Francesca, can we have a roll call? Here.
Here. Here.
Yes. I'm here. I wasn't yesterday. Okay, so the first item here is our consent agenda, and that's the approval of the April 6, 2023 meeting minutes. Anybody have any comments, corrections? Is there a second? Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions or negations? Looks like we got that done. The next item is public comments.
You may.
Would you like to comment to us on any item not on the agenda?
Not on the agenda, no, and I'm willing to sign up for a future agenda if it's even the right place to speak. I found out about this meeting 1 hour ago.
Come on up to the
Can
dais.
can I ask you to come forward to the microphone?
I found out about this meeting about an hour ago from Laura Hastings, managing director down at the gallery in the old Maritime Museum. And she called Brian and said maybe I'd have some luck coming up here. So I'll just real quick tell you a story. I don't have any paperwork with me, but I do have plenty of paperwork. 60 years ago, my father, Paul McReynolds, who was a sculptor as well as an aeronautical engineer, donated a wooden seated pelican to the city of Monterey, which was mounted on top of a monument in front of the marina, but closer to Fisherman's Wharf, but off towards wharf number 2. After he passed, the wood deteriorated, and fortunately the parks supervisor got in touch with me somehow, found out who I was, called me, and I got with Monterey History and Art. And that's why I went and saw her, because she was at a desk that said Monterey History and Art. And so I glued these pieces back together and paired them with plaster and sanded them and shaped them as I had hoped my father would appreciate to be what it was before, in wood. And City of Monterey paid to have it cast in bronze at the Monterey Sculpture Center, and I helped install it. And that's 30 years ago, almost exactly, I think. And about a year ago, I noticed that the little upper base of the sculpture was coming apart, and there was a stone missing, and you could see the mounting rod inside. And I called History and Art, talked to a young man, and he said he would look into it. I didn't hear back. And so the other day I just went and bought I've been a contractor all my life. And so I went and bought an appropriate piece of stone, went down there with some mortar and lots of paperwork, so I wouldn't look like the Dennis the Menace thief returned, and got the old stuff out of there and repaired it, and it looks great. I was just down there again today checking on it to make sure, and it still looks fine. But one of my sons told me that I should talk to the city about having it declared a historical monument. You know, we're not talking about Spanish Monterey, we're talking about 60 years ago. But nevertheless, my father lived up on the old Huckleberry Hill area. That's where I was born, and he was an artist from way back, and Bruce Harris and all those people. So I'm not going to last forever, and I would love it if my kids could bring their kids, etc., and see it there. I have a postcard of it that was commercially produced long ago, And you can see the monument just as it is now with the plaque, with the legend about the harbor and the sculpture on top and my father's name and the name of the person who wrote the text and the person who made the mosaic of the information on there. And so where was I? I repaired it and okay. In this postcard, you can see that there's 2x4s around it with a little cement, and outside of that is just sand down to the water and everywhere else. Nothing else was there. And it's still there right where it was. And it turned from wood to bronze. And I'm interested in the process of having something declared a historical monument whereby in the future, private enterprise or the city of Monterey would not be able to just plan it out of existence for some reason, valid or not, you know. So I may be in the wrong place. I may need to get on the next agenda and bring some paperwork or be referred to somebody else.
I would encourage you to talk to Brian Edwards, the
Okay.
museum's
Yeah, he gave me
director,
his card.
and
So-
we'll go from there.
Okay, that sounds
Thank
great.
you for
And-
bringing it to our attention.
Thank you. And she just said they're having a meeting in an hour. So I said, okay. I still show up. And with your leave, I'll go and speak to you as soon as I can.
Sounds great.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
So for anyone who is not joining us here in the council chamber, there are two ways to virtually participate in today's Museums and Cultural Arts Commission meeting. You may join on Zoom using your computer, tablet, or smartphone, or you may call into the Zoom meeting. To join the meeting on Zoom, use the link or phone number on the agenda at isearchmonterey.org. To call in by telephone, dial toll-free 833-568-8864, enter meeting ID 161-622-2299, followed by the pound sign. If prompted to enter a participant ID, press pound. Today's meeting is also streamed live on the city's YouTube account at youtube.com/City of Monterey with an approximate 10-second delay, and on Comcast channel 25 with up to a 90-second delay. If you plan to make a public comment, please join the meeting using Zoom or by telephone and ensure you join in time to accommodate the delay. And Chair Evans, there are no public comments at this time.
All right, thank you, Francesca. So now we can move on to informational reports. And the first one is our update from the Library and Museums Director, Mr. Brian Edwards.
Thank you, Chair Evans. Thank you, Commissioners. Starting off, and there's probably a little bit overlap in a lot of the items here, but starting off, our Kalisa statue has been repaired. So I hope you take a look at that down on Cannery Row. There was a stainless steel bolt installed in the hand, and the glass has been welded on. So we're happy to get that repair done right over there. But moving forward with that, I would like to request to work with one or two commissioners to walk up Bruce Harris Way to look about the possible placement of a panel or a mural or something like that. As you may recall from past meetings, we took down the 2 4x8 panels, the Bruce Harris right there at the base. And if you walk that path going from from Cannery Row through the rec trail up to, I believe that's Wave, right? You go there, there's multiple interpretive panels at the base of Cannery Row. So there was, I think, three interpretive panels, one regarding rickets, two regarding workers on Cannery Row. And then the Bruce Harris mural was here, and then the Kalisa statue is right there. You go up a little bit, there's another interpretive panel. There's then the 3 worker houses. There's the interpretive panels regarding that, and then a Cannery Road directory, and then you've got the rec trail. At the base of that set of stairs, there's a Steinbeck interpretive panel. It then goes up, and then there's kind of a landing plaza. There's a bench there dedicated to Bruce Harris and his wife. And then you start going up that stairs, and then there's the Moonwalker statue from the conference center. But from the top of the street down to the middle to the rec trail, there's not really much that draws you in on that side. It really draws you in from the base side from Cannery Row. So was just thinking about walking through that rather than replacing the mural or with a panel at the exact same place, which is going to be kind of muddied up in my opinion with other panels there at that base, that we should think about another place and then possibly work with whether that's planning or historic preservation about another panel or mural or whatever that would be at that site.
I would like to volunteer, and go out on site and share with you. Actually, there was a park plan done, well, I want to say the late eighties by Michael Kemp.
Okay,
For that area and the adjacent parking lot. I'd like to share that with you, on site.
that'd be great.
I'll have to look on that too.
Okay, yeah, I can coordinate with you guys. That'd be fantastic. Thank you. It'd be a good walking day, a good day to go walk too. Also, just an update, inquiring with the planning department regarding the process for adding additional Cannery labels to walkway in Monterey. I know Cannery Row Business Association has ordered new labels. So if you're walking down there, you will see that a lot of the labels have worn out. The new ones, the replacement ones have come in. I was up at Ryan Ranch last week and saw them in there. So those will be installed as they have time. But there are two additional canneries that we believe should be added, and been talking to Commissioner Thomas about this as well. One is Booth's Sardines, and there is the rock and the plaque right there, kind of at the entrance of the rec trail right there by Fisherman's Wharf. And that was one of the first canneries right there in Monterey. So it's not on Cannery Row, it's on the rec trail. And the other one is La Esperanza. And that was the other two different Rodriguez that had the La Esperanza Fish Packing Company at 800 Ocean View, which is also known as Ed Ricketts Lab, 740 Ocean View. So he bought that property because they had the concrete tanks in the back. So we have a label for that too, and the possibility of kind of recognizing the contributions of the Rodriguez families, I should say, there on Cannery Row. So with that, those two labels might be coming soon. So I'm inquiring with planning about what's the process for adding those, especially ones that are outside of Cannery Row proper, like Booths, where that would go. And working with two CSUMB service learners to update the content for the future mobile application. What I'm working with right now with them is adding public art, because the content right now is about all of our different path of history in our buildings, but we have a number of public art, as we just heard earlier today from the public comment, that people want to know about in Monterey. So I've been going around taking photos, getting the descriptions from our prior master plan list, and then having it translated into Spanish as well. So we'll start with the English and Spanish on that coming soon. And our Cannery Row Days was a great series. Thanks to local history librarian Andres Garza for his work on that, and all of our community partners with that. And the PBL sign has been repaired and reinstalled by the city staff. And this morning, we also repaired the garage. The garage was not opening, so we had that is back to functioning. And deaccessioning of Cannery Row worker apron. I spoke with Jordan about this and actually reached out to Commissioner Thomas about this too. And you'll see in the packet, I believe, that there's an image of a display there and we were wondering if those were our items because they were not accessioned in our museums. And I didn't see anything that said Property City of Monterey or who those were from, but really it gets direct sunlight right there. And so all of those items in there have been really damaged. So we've taken down that display for now to get those items back to their proper parties, but really thinking about we should be doing something. It's more of like a glass, like poster kind of display.
On the circuit panel, with the candy whistle up there and the circuit panel.
Right in the corner. Yeah, right.
I've seen that panel that says where that's a lot of times. But none of them-
Oh, okay. Okay.
I was involved in that.
Yeah, I read it, but I guess I didn't put the two and two together. There's one right there around the corner, but
But I'm very appreciative that you took it all out of it.
yeah, it was just I had just, been doing my walks to go through to get photos of everything. And so I walked back around that way and I was like, wait a minute, the condition of those items were really poor at that time. It was just really the sunlight is just hitting it, it gets direct sun where it's sitting. And it's not a great place to house artifacts. It might be great for a replica or doing something else regarding it. So we may have to change that panel then as well to think about that in the future, or whatever we'd want to do, or limit it to certain things that should be in there. And with that, happy to answer any questions or comments.
Any questions? Comments? Okay, so let's move on to the report by Jordan.
All right, thank you. Let's see, so I know we have a lot of stuff to get through, so I'll just make this short and sweet. Things have been activity-wise, there's not as much going on, but I am still just as busy, mostly working on the Buffalo Soldiers exhibit, which I have finalized and submitted to Director Edwards for printing. If we can get that all printed out within the next couple of weeks and everything works out fine, I hope to have it installed and have an opening on Saturday, June 17th in time for Juneteenth on that Monday. So that is the goal right now. So as long as we can get everything printed, that'll finally be done and good to go. And let's see. And with Colton Hall, we had some excellent school tours this last month, administered by our museum attendants, Liz Jensen and Alexis Leon. And our Saturday tours of the Pacific Biological Laboratories was another success. We had 83 visitors. So our new format is continuing to work and we're getting a lot of people coming in. And also with the lab, I was able to give a tour to two daughters of a former lab member, Judge Richard Eldred. And so Margaret and Barbara spent a lot of time in the lab growing up, and one of them even got married there and had these photos of the ceremony and the reception that was held at the lab. And so I gave their families a tour of the place, and we kind of exchanged stories of what happened there, because they hadn't heard, specifics of the history that we know, and we haven't heard what they know. So that was really great, being able to have descendants of lab members there. And the last thing I'll comment on is I think it was back in January, we had a a free emergency preparedness consultation of Colton Hall by the Northeast Document Conservation Center. They have contacted us and they're going to do a consultation of both the Pacific Biological Laboratories and the Presidio Monterey. And so that'll take place. Actually, the lab will be taking place this month, and then next month will be the Presidio Museum. And I will stop there.
Okay, any questions?
I just had one comment, reading the Coast Weekly at Alta Bakery this morning, and I saw a little blurb there. And I think it's part of their, the whole Pacific Grove, Feast of the Lanterns, and but they're doing parade, some kind of a walker.
Bill,
showing the-
Excuse me, Bill, your microphone.
They're doing a walk or parade showing the various Chinese encampments. And I just wondered if, Jordan, if you could contact them, if the city of Monterey should be involved, the city of Pacific Grove, Marine Hopkins, the aquarium. I'm sorry? Yeah, Walk of Remembrance. Oh, they have? I didn't realize. I thought this was the first year. Oh, but it's funny that we're not involved at all with it.
I think it's primarily put together by the Civil Museum.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll take a look into it and see what I can find out.
Mike?
Consultation.
Your mic.
The consultation is that the same group that came recently?
No, that's a different group. That's for that was for Colton Hall, and Old Monterey Jail and the vault. This is an emergency preparedness consultation where they come through, they walk through, they look over and see what any issues may be in the building, you know, fire issues, things like that, and to go over and help you implement these things into your
Have we seen a report from that consultation?
No, they reached out to me. Both are working on that, and I expect to have it by the next commission meeting here.
Okay, any other questions or comments on Jordan's report? Okay, so let's move on to our first public appearance item. We have to receive the expanded Path of History preliminary memo from Page and Turnbull. And Brian, are you leading on that?
Yeah, so I will just say, hoping that the commissioners can take a look at the memo and provide comments and feedback before we go back to them with their task 3 specific plan and schedule some public meetings regarding actual sites and paths for the Path of History. One thing I'll add on here is you'll note there are letters to or from Albion to the to different tribal communities. That research has not been finished by that partner Albion, so that's why that information is not in this memo. So those things are reaching out to. They reached out to different communities, the Rumsen, Esalen nations to see if they wanted to provide feedback on different cultural areas of importance for them here in Monterey. And different people said, yes, we are interested in participating. So they're having those conversations. I have not seen that information yet. So that's why those information is not here. But just to recall that we're looking at 2 paths that look at highlighting underrepresented groups here in Monterey. After having a couple different meetings with Page and Turnbull, one of the areas that we've discussed with them is the Pearl District with the Japanese community there in Monterey that are still here as well. And another one, so there's the document here really goes over different eras of Monterey and Monterey history. And of course, we have the copy of the draft Path of History document that the Museums Commission worked on, I believe, with Dennis and probably Inga a couple of years back in 2020. But in this document, really, there's 2 paths looking at. One is, as I mentioned, the Pearl District. One is possibly New Monterey, as looking at the stories of the different immigrants coming in and the contributions there in Monterey. I will highlight also, just on my own research, I'm not sure if this is going to come up with the research from Albion, but I know there are a number of indigenous sites there in the New Monterey area as well, just from reading different books that I have from Don Howard and have gone through different sites, different excavation sites over time. So I'm not sure if there's going to be other kind of areas that they will highlight other than that are listed in this booklet here. But happy to any feedback or guidelines to bring back there to Page and Turnbull, but really what they have right now is a lot of different maps and different areas that they've looked at for the different proposed districts. And you'll see the different Sanborn maps back in there, page 37, page 38. And yeah, happy to answer any questions or comments.
I have a question. So
Sure.
and I think this was Bill's concern too, but my biggest concern, and I understand there's a financial element here.
Yeah.
But you could only do so much research on the internet and books you get out of the library. I mean, at some point they need to come down here, walk that neighborhood, talk to people. And that's my concern. I don't see that anywhere that they're planning to do any of that kind of work.
Mhm.
And I just think that's really important.
I have a question. I haven't really had a chance to look at this in depth, but for the actual plaques, are they just going to add additional plaques or put in new plaques for the whole thing?
So that was not specific in this plan. So one of the things when we got down to kind of choosing with the subcommittee up from the different proposals, this one was they added additional costs on whether they would, what we would do for signage, because we have the traditional path of history, then there's the Explore Monterey tour. There are the old Colton Hall shaped signs, the white signs, which are outside of various buildings outside of here in Monterey. So it's what is appropriate for a separate path, because this is not like a single path that, because if you go to California State Parks leads out of there at the Customs House and, you know, the Pacific House, they lead their path of history tours, you know, there are different days of the week that you can pay like $10, $20 for, and they'll walk around there. They don't cover all of the different city buildings as well. So with that right there, I think that path of history, they would be doing their consistent walk, the walk that they're normally doing through like the Larkin property or, you know, all of the different, the California Theater, they would be doing that same kind of a walk. So the thought of this is whether these would be kind of two separate walks that would be distinct about for a specific kind of group. So that would be like, you would go on a specific walk for this, for the, whether that's the Japanese community or whether it would be kind of First Nation of Monterey and, you know, new families, whatever that kind of second group would be, but what the signage would be, I think we would have to figure that out. And we could add additional funding if we wanted to put something in there, but I'm not sure if we would do the same. Because those have adapted over time too. You know, we used to have what, the blue, I think it was the blue paint on the ground, and then it went to the brass plaques. And then we've got the yellow plaques that Jordan and I are talking about as they're doing street work right now of replacing some of those. And there's also the big square tiles that have been in there as well. So there's been different tiles and different signs all through different eras for this. So it's trying to figure out what's the most appropriate that's going to work. And I will say state parks, from my conversations with them in terms of like the on-sale tours of the phone tours, they're really interested in highlighting Monterey State Historic Parks and not so much all of the other parks in the district. So if you go to the Customs House, they have their own flyer right now, which highlights their map of their buildings, not so much all of the buildings surrounded in Monterey. So however we kind of come out with it at an end plan, I would see this possibly as like we could have a brochure or a map or something online, or to start off with even just like a cell phone tour that highlights that, and it's an additional tour that doesn't have to start at a specific place.
Yes. Mike?
Well, on page 10 of their report, they say we may have to look at some more technological tools. And I think that same question you're raising, how is the information going to be presented on the path? And they really haven't gotten very far at all on that question, as far as I can see. It seems to me we need to move to using something, you know, that is more modern than just putting some pieces on the ground or, you know.
Yeah, and I think we don't want a planning study. I think we wanted, as part of the contract, we wanted something. In fact, wasn't the contract modified, or you discussed with them, Brian, so that they would include actual sign designs as part of the Pearl Street? And, you know, to me, one of the things that's sort of missing, even in our existing path of history, how do you get from, say, Colton Hall to Casa Serrano? Are we going to do that with the cell phone tour and says, well, after you've been in Colton Hall, you exit and make a left and you go by these historic buildings, and then that historic building, you go from there to Casa Serrano? Are we, you know, we need that transition to go from one historic site to another. So that's one major thing. I would hope they would deal with that. And second, on packet page 36, so the Pearl Street, are we all agreement with those boundaries? I thought at one time we were going to go all the way down to Fremont, and I understand this concentrates on the Japanese settlement and the other historic sites, like I mentioned, Robert Louis Stevenson, the historic building where the Roger Post had his thing, and the chapel. I mean, there's a lot of other historic buildings, but that's not good. Is there a consensus that should not be part of the Pearl Street?
I personally thought it was going to be, the Pearl Street was about how many different people live together. And that's why it would, it went all the way up to Fremont. And it was interesting. I thought it was very interesting, the different ethnicities that all lived in the same area and got along with each other and knew each other and that sort of thing.
Yeah, like if you take this current boundary, the center line of Pearl Street, then you're missing the old Japanese market that's owned by the bank
Right.
and all that. So.
Yeah. Well, and the church is not in there. I mean, and Alfredo's is not in there. There's
Yeah.
a bunch of things that aren't in this approach as compared to what we were looking at a year or two ago.
So I would say on those are going to be on part of the, I would imagine would be part of the specific meeting where they have on their timeline for a specific meeting. So coming up, and I do believe on their bid, that was what I had presented to the subcommittee, that it was still under there as a Zoom meeting is what they're planning on that. I'll double check that when I get back to the office on there. But those things about the sites and all that, I mean, that's still up to us as well, about like how far out this goes and what the sites are going to be. I think we're going to have ultimate ownership of what's going to be on our path, I would imagine. So I would just say having all of these things about this is the draft and what they've presented. But if we have more, the larger out in the commission wants to look at expanding out to Fremont, we can respond back and say, this is what we want to do, is we want to expand out to here. Speaking to Commissioner Sovereign's comment regarding moving to technology, or to yours, Commissioner, is it regarding the transition? I think that's really a hard thing unless either you're having somebody like a walking tour, which is, as I mentioned, with state parks, where they have people that lead the tours, which is a great service, I think, for people that go in there and on Saturdays or whatever days, and actually people gather, and at 11 o'clock or 1 o'clock, you can go out and walk a group of people around there and walk all of the different sites and hear those stories. I think those are great tools. The technology that we're looking at in the app that I'm looking at building basically does build in like a geotag in there, so that when you're within a certain distance, it can autoplay or tell you where the next place is. The issue we have on some of the things is that some of our numbers are so close, and that like our items, for example, at Lower Presidio, we have different interpretive panels that are within 15 feet of each other. So you don't get great cell coverage up there when you're up on the Lower Presidio. So having it autoplay based on where you're at isn't always going to work. So that's where I think some of it has to be in the future, whether we want to look at specific times to host tours, whether the library museums host different walking tours as well regarding our own kind of path of history and these paths to expand it. Because I do think that the product of getting on from Page and Turnbull, they did ask for like a budget amendment when we looked at their original project proposal. So we could amend the contract to actually add on that amount for the signage, and they do like to do a lot of signage. That's a lot of the work that they do, interpretives, like the what that signage would look like. But I think all of that stuff, getting all of the approvals and timeline, takes a long time. So really, if we wanted to just build something ourselves and have a walking tour and start doing it before we got through all of the permitting process to get different signs and everything, because there's a lot of those buildings we don't own, right? There's so many of those places that getting the approvals to put in interpretive panels or something in the ground or something on the wall, all of that would take a lot of time. So that's why I think having a walking tour, starting off with something digital with content, would be a lot easier and faster for us, and then moving towards that.
Having a person-led tour, I think, is a nice idea, but I don't know that we're ever going to have the budget for that sort of thing. The other thing is that oftentimes people come to the city not necessarily on Saturday or Sunday, and it would be nice. It would seem to me we're going to need a brochure of walking tours, and then so that people can find out that there are 3 or 4 walking tours and decide to take X tour today and then use their phone or however you're going to do that. You know, otherwise everything is sort of disconnected and I don't know how people are going to find it.
True, and that is something that I've been talking about with Francesca about because of the Explore Monterey, that you'll see those things at the distributed at hotels or different buildings, and that's, you know, our phone tours and the different sites. Now we get those printed and then pay to have those distributed at different places. So one of the places we were talking about is distributing out further towards Santa Cruz as well. So you can get it Santa Cruz, then Monterey, you know, put it at the airport, put it at the different hotels and the buildings up there. But really, what content do we want to have? And I think we need to update that brochure and flyer with different paths before we reprint it. Because right now it really has a lot of information. Number one, that's out of date. It still has the Dali Museum, right? Or it has some of them have the Colton Hall, the wrong hours, or all these, there's different stuff in there. And I think if we're the ones for distributing it, we should really focus on what we provide and what we can do. So I think if we put it on a map on there and we were able to print that off, we could do a map that really highlights all of those kind of things in a walking tour on there. That
Well,
would be
it looks
separate
like-
from this process, but I'm just saying that is something we could work on in the next couple of months too.
So is there something we should be doing between now and the next meeting to move this along in the direction that we want it to go?
Well, I think just making sure that the subcommittee members attend the next sessions with, I'm going to reach out to Paige and Turnbull about what the next meetings are. And then if we can, when they schedule the public sessions for the two tours, the two paths, that however that program is going to be handled, that we have commissioners there as well to read through all of this, have all of your feedback, and then send any of your feedback to me so that I can provide it to Paige and Turnbull.
The two paths, you mean Pearl Street and New Monterey?
Yeah.
What? I'm a little bit confused because as I mentioned to you in my email, I thought this commission said we have three areas that we want to concentrate on. We want to concentrate on Pearl Street, Colton Hall, and Custom House with state parks. I mean, I understand. I mean, they made some good comments about New Monterey, but I'm afraid that's going to take away from these other areas like Pearl Street and that. Are they? And some of these are, I mean, there's 2 or 3 on Lighthouse. One is on Archer Street, 6 blocks away. The other one's on Prescott, Pine Street. I mean, that's not an easy path of history on New Monterey. And again, I value their comments, but I think we wanted to concentrate on our existing areas downtown, like the Custom House Fisherman's Wharf that has a lot of Native American stuff that ties into Lower Presidio. So I'm not sure, how do they jump from Pearl Street to New Monterey?
So I think some of that was during earlier, I'm trying to think of the different dates we've had for their meetings. I probably have the timeline here. If not, I have it back in my office. Is talking about them of what communities to highlight, because we're talking about the underrepresented communities, and we have an abundance of highlights of the Mexican, Spanish, and early California history through the path of history. That's really where it really highlights on through there. Colton Hall as the basis. Colton Hall is one of the sites on the path of history. So we've got that as one of the areas on the sites. It's the symbol for all of those white and black signs that you see all around town with the building. So that's part of it there. So with that, there's a number of different communities coming in through Monterey, which were the Chinese community, the Japanese community, the Sicilian communities. They were all not really highlighted at the time when the Path of History was created, because at that time, the Path of History was, 1930s, and that was not really that long ago. There wasn't that big of a a time difference between when the people were actually there and when Cannery Row was starting and all of that was on there. So that was part of it, is that those were omitted, and that was in the earlier draft. There are discussions about the new Monterey era as well, in the area in there. So that was part of it, is like discussing with them what groups need to be represented in here and what areas can be represented in here. And so if we're talking about Colton Hall, what era are we talking about? And that's a question for you, Commissioner. What era are we talking about with Colton Hall? If we're talking about Path of History era, is there, because some of that stuff was regarding more of the Victorian era, that I think when I looked at the path, and that was not when I looked at some of the draft, and I don't know if that's what they were looking for in the grant. And the grant on there is looking at focusing on underrepresented communities, not so much on the master plan. The master plan was submitted to them as for them to look through, and other paths on there.
I see. So they're following the guidelines of the grant, which emphasizes underrepresented communities.
Right. So that's part of the application really focuses on the grants of underrepresented communities. And that's so looking at those communities in there. That's why these paths are tied specifically to that, which is because there's other paths that have been identified, which are garden paths, as a potential to add out there, or different eras of Monterey, different artists of Monterey. Those different things have been discussed, I think, in the past, but they're not really along the scope of this grant, which paid for by the Community Foundation for Monterey County, is specific to that
I see.
kind of role right there. So that's why they received a copy of that grant application. It was written.
So I guess that may be the response to my question. Was we spent one whole meeting talking about building a form to figure out whose ethnicity we might want to, whether or which ethnicities were going to qualify for the tours, which was very frustrating to some of us. Whatever happened to the results of that meeting? Is there a form now, or
There
a
is not.
checklist or something?
Right. And that's a draft equity form that they're working on. And that's actually part of also that was on the grant submission. So that was, I think, task 2 on the grant. So that we're looking for. There was a requirement for the winning agency to draft a social justice and equity plan for the museums, for this kind of looking at different programs and services. So with that, that's why they were looking at different forms and proposals through different museums, through different commissions and cities on there. They have not gotten back to me with a draft yet of that. So that will be presented back to the subcommittee, and then back to the commission.
I'm not sure what we were going to do with it, but it seemed to be a real detour, and now anyway. Yeah, I'm sorry I was out of town because I didn't have time to read this 60-page thing, but I think we certainly need to go through that and provide feedback before we meet with them.
Right. And I'll be scheduling another meeting with the group. And I think if the subcommittee, you can provide detailed feedback for me, that'd be fantastic before the next meeting with Page and Turnbull.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mike?
This is probably a minor point, but it's related to the discussion here. On page 34 of the report, or 52 of the packet, they show Monterey County population by race, and they do it every 10 years, but they stop in 1960. and there have been, I think, considerable change since then. I can't understand why they stopped in 1960.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And also, did you say county? I mean, we're talking Monterey.
They don't, that data doesn't exist, as I understand, with the city, but even for the county, it would be interesting
I
to
thought
see.
the census data was
Yes.
finer than that. Finer than counties.
Usually it'll tell you the township and the district and the map, and all by the different areas. But I haven't done an extensive search on Monterey County. I've done a lot on Alameda County and Contra Costa County.
But I'm saying, what about the city of Monterey?
Right.
Can we? Well, it'd be nice to know what was going on after 1950.
I do think it would be very helpful if we have a subcommittee meeting with the next draft or whatever, next communication with Page and Turnbull, then I think we can have a more full discussion with the entire commission
Mhm.
if the subcommittee reviews it ahead of time.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to make sure that provide this to the whole commission so we can have some robust discussion. So I appreciate everyone taking a look at this today too.
Okay, any further questions, comments? All right, and we'll move on to the last item on our agenda.
Chair, Commissioner Evans,
Oh,
I just wanted
sorry.
to see, and that's okay, if there are any public comments on this item, please raise your Zoom hand. And if you. Okay, there are no public comments.
All right, thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't pause there. The last item is to receive or to discuss the cultural arts staffing and budget for the fiscal year 2024. And question, aren't we doing 2-year budgets nowadays?
We are not,
No.
not at this time. They're still doing a 1-year budget at this time.
Okay. So again, Brian, will you take the lead?
Thank you. So as you may know, we are in the middle of our budget process here for the city of Monterey. And as I mentioned the last time, I did ask for the addition of the regular part-time cultural arts assistant as we had discussed and had been recommended. That position was denied during the budget discussions. During that time, we looked at our current staffing right now, which was, I know in the past year, we had the past fiscal year, Jordan Leininger's position was increased from a part-time seasonal to a regular part-time position. We had that at a cost of, let me put that in there, I believe there was an additional cost of $24,837 that was in there that was allocated from the Museum Trust Fund to support that cost for the increase. So for this fiscal year, I asked to increase to put Jordan's position into the general fund. And the other position that is partial is Francesca Garibaldi's position, which is partially paid for by the general fund under museums. So with that, the proposal came back and the budget line of 4103, which is our part-time seasonal PTS staff, which is our museum attendance, was zeroed out. And with that, it would basically, those are our folks that open Colton Hall for our museums right now, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday during these springs and summer hours, and do our class visits throughout the month. So with that, the requests come back from the budget team was for the funding for basically the funding was going to be flat for museums this year. So because the funding went from increase for general fund on the fund code for the regular part-time, that actually decreased the amount that was available for the part-time seasonal time. So with that kind of flatlining on there, basically the request was if we want these positions to put them through a trust fund request. Per section 21.4 of Monterey City Code, the trust fund requests need to be recommended by Museum and Cultural Arts Commission to the City Council. I have that section right in there. So with that, my requests for the budget team, it was in there, and you'll see also the kind of the past numbers that we've had in there. So for this coming fiscal year, my request was for $20,000 for part-time seasonal hours for our Colton Hall Museum attendance. And partially that was because we've seen an increase in schools coming back and asking to come and do tours here at Colton Hall in the old jail. Last fiscal year, that was $14,000, what the budget was from the general fund. Prior years was budgeted, but 2022, 2021, 2020 was not spent at those levels because we were close to the pandemic. That was $37,370. And so those were not actually spent in all the way in there. And then 2019, so you see 37,370 in the past years prior. And the cultural arts assistant, I did ask for the cost of, if just doing that at 1,000 hours, part-time seasonal, that's the max that a part-time seasonal can work. That's around $27,200 with additional costs for benefits, depending on finance. So with that, I have in this report a list of the trust funds and special funds that you will see for the Museum and Cultural Arts Commission for your ability to make those decisions. So partially, I just want to mark on here the museum revenues just for your review. So you see what those are. Those are when we sell different items over there at our museums. Revenue year to date, $7,480. That's basically, so you'll see some of these things here, contributions coming in at $1,203.19. Those are often people just leaving dollars, or if we have an event, donating here to the museums. Sale of general fund promotional items or sale of trust fund promotional items. Those are items like we sell at Colton Hall. If we sell books, if we sell posters, ornaments, we also sell them at the library, those kind of things. That's where the money goes. And Pacific Biological Labs donations, $1,032, and Pacific Biological Labs rental income, $500.50. So with that, I have the list of the museum trust funds, what those are listed at, as well as some of the funds and what they're specifically allocated for. For example, the Ferguson Family Trust Fund, that is for the Presidio of Monterey Museum, as well as for the Artifact Specialist position. Frank Emilio Locasa Reserve Trust, there's only $125 in that left, but that's because we bought the 2 original California Constitution documents through that fund, I believe around 20 years ago or so. Those 2 documents that we have up in the display cases in Colton Hall were purchased through that fund. And there are some special funds that are set aside for specific reasons. You have the cultural arts donations, those are for conservation. The Chamber of Music, those are our music series there at Colton Hall. Cannery Road mural restoration, those funds were set aside for those 4x8 wooden panels that were on around where the Hotel Intercontinental was, led by Bruce Harris, that project, and where we still have some of those. So the thought was about sending those off, auctioning some and restoring some. We still have the majority of those panels. And there are different reserve accounts for art acquisition and artifact acquisition. Those are set aside specifically funds for if we are purchasing different art or artifacts. So you'll see those at the bottom of the accounts. But with that, this request, if the commission chooses to go forward, it would be a recommendation from the commission regarding spending trust funds from the Museum and Cultural Arts Trust Fund for the hours of service. So with that, happy to answer any questions or comments.
Mike?
I understood what you said, and as I understood, there's a category of funds that covers things like the temporary people working the Colton Hall, and the guidance came as, we have to flatline that thing despite the fact that it covers probably 50 people in 10 different activities. To me, that's just not an acceptable effort of doing budgeting to say, despite the fact that these are all very different, and you have to flatline the top. Well, that's just not an acceptable budgeting procedure. I'm sorry.
Well, I will say it was The staffing hours and allocations were not decided by the department. And so what we presented were costs on different activities and different things on there. So it was coming back was, I don't know if flatlining is the right word, but it was basically keeping the museums department, not increasing the budget. They were basically not increasing the budget for this fiscal year based on last year. And so if any increases would be coming through the trust fund on there. And so when we allocate, we have different codes for full-time staff, part-time staff, and part-time seasonal staff. And so with those, because the part-time and full-time staff are funded out of the general fund, and there was no increases coming through, the funding was reduced on that side by the budget team for the part-time seasonal, which consists currently of 3 people that cover our limited hours over there at Colton Hall. So those people generally do it, as I was mentioning right now, it's 10 to 4 p.m. where we do our generally a May, June, July, August kind of hours, but other times of the year we have them operating just Saturday and Sunday 10 to 4. But those are just 3 people right now that are doing those hours and doing all of the class visits as well.
As I understood your discussion, and I still have this impression that at the top, they said flatline all of those, regardless of what division or sub area. No?
It's only us,
Who's us?
museums.
I think right now we're dealing with budget committee, the city manager's office and finance director. I think we have to consider that, but go beyond that, and then we should go directly to the city council and include, segments of your report and Jordan's report, and basically say, we have 3 museums. We have 3 museums that are very important to the history of Monterey, to the locals and to the tourists. You have to provide sufficient staffing for them. If not, close them. Close the museum, and maybe sell them. That will help the city's revenue problem. But if you're going to have 3 museums that are operating, that are important to the historic character of the city of Monterey, you have to fund it. So that's, that would be I would suggest a letter from our commission to the council. The heck with the staff. Send that to the, and I'm surprised, I'm disappointed that Nat's not here, but send that to the city council and say, we think that you should fund that out of the general fund as a minimum, and provide this background and data as appendices, all the attendance and all the stuff that Jordan's doing. And secondarily saying, and we need another halftime person. And again, we think that should come out of the general fund. But if not, if you're that broke, then I think we should just take it out of the trust fund. This 217,000, that could be spent on staffing, right?
Well, wait, isn't the top line there, Fund 818, that 217 is really the total of everything below there.
I don't believe so, and I can verify that with finance, but I think that is separate. It was on there, and that's where, and that is actually where the funding came out of for last year for the 27,000. But I will say, if we're funding this, that there's not a steady revenue stream that we have here in museums right now either. And I just
No, we have to do it year by year, and hopefully that the city's revenues and the conference picks up. But again, I would say that you have these obligations. It's just like you have the library and you have the sports center, but you don't provide staffing for them, but then close the buildings down. If you're not going to provide staffing for them, same with our commission, our museums. So it ought to come out of the general fund. And then secondarily, though, if you don't agree with that at all, city council, forget about the staff, then take it out of that trust fund and get your additional halftime person.
Where did the trust fund come from? That's one question. And what were the restrictions to the trust fund? And a trust fund, typically, you don't spend that, you invest it, and then you spend the results, the output from the investment. To spend the trust fund, what's our run rate? All you gotta do is divide that by the run rate, and you can tell how long you're gonna have a trust fund.
right. I don't have the long-term numbers from where that came from because I don't have the for these items right here, the 217,875,886, we have some of the information regarding the Ferguson or the Frank Emilio based on when we got those over time. But I will say those trust funds are limiting further and further. But some of these items, like when we have on the reserve accounts, artifacts acquisition or art acquisition, some of those were the 1980s, or they had set aside different amounts over there. And I think some of these have been either donations over time, but I can't be entirely sure because I don't have that long of a history here to really understand where all of that money came from. I've looked at the different last years that I've seen on there, but there's not a steady revenue coming into our trust fund to see where all of that money has come from historically.
But, oh, well, okay.
And so just to reiterate too, I mean, the city actually has an ethical obligation to take care of those artifacts. I mean, that's is something that should be number one on your priority. So I agree with Bill, that money should come somewhere. I mean, that you have to take care of those things.
I agree, as I'm the person who does that. But I mean, to go off what Commissioner Wachowski was saying, if this all goes proposed, Colton Hall is closed because there are no museum attendants. I have barely enough docents as it is to keep the other two museums open. And also it's in our city code that it's supposed to be open 7 days a week.
Colton Hall is,
Yeah.
that's right. So they're in violation of their own code.
Well, again, by your, just by your report, you can see the difference pre-COVID when we had more staffing, how many people came to Colton Hall and how many people are coming now. So, yeah, I think we ought to say that by the staff proposal, close Colton Hall.
So who should write this letter?
Well, I'm not proposing to close Colton Hall, but I mean, that's what our option is right now.
I think Brian should draft the letter for your signature, Bob,
I-
to the city council. When are the council hearings? Do you know?
June 6th and June 20th.
Oh, so we have time.
So yeah,
Yeah.
if the commission wishes to present to their feedback, I think the appropriate time is the June 6th and June 20th sessions to discuss that. But as I've stated, I don't have the authority to spend the trust fund without your approval for those positions, but I do see that it'd be necessary for us to keep Colton Hall open and to really protect and preserve our history here. Colton Hall is not just California history, it's Monterey history. And there's a lot of people that come here every day for these different museums to see our history. And we talked about it, we spent some time talking about the path of history just prior to this. So all of these things come into play, but I'll leave that at your pleasure on how to make those decisions on that. But I do think going to the appropriate council meetings on June 6th and June 20th and the budget hearings are the best way to go forward.
Yeah, I think once the letter goes out, we make individual phone calls, personal phone calls to individual council members. Staff's not going to change their position. It's up to the city council. We have a fairly new city council.
Yeah,
3 new members on there.
that's right. Yeah, I think that's exactly what it sounds like to me, is that we need to be in front of the city council. Maybe even before they have their, during public comments.
Yeah, the last meeting in May, maybe.
Yeah, to let them know that they have a problem on the horizon. So I'd be happy to work with you, Bill.
Sure.
You had a lot of good quotes there but we also need the data.
Yeah. We have to make sure those numbers are right. The 217,000, is that, and if it's, are there any restrictions on that money?
And I'll get that information
Yeah.
for you as well.
And how much money to make Colton Hall solvent and to get your position, that other halftime position that you requested, what are we talking about? 40, 50,000?
Well, we would look at the numbers again and I can provide you back the information when you're working on those letters with all of
Yeah.
that
I
about.
can take a shot at a draft and send it to you and Brian,
That-
or send
yeah.
it to the entire commission if you want.
Sure, yeah. Do something, yeah, draft something and send it to the whole commission. We can get comments. And then I'll work with Brian to get something to put together.
Yeah.
To let, and this is sort of the first volley, I think.
Yeah.
And so to clarify for the information you're wanting from me, from the fund 818 Museum Trust Fund, what the restrictions are with that. And then the costs for museum attendance for, I think it's 362 days a year. Is that correct? From the city code?
We're closed we're open every day except Thanksgiving, Christmas and New Year's.
So
Yeah.
662, and what the RPT versus PTS costs are.
An even more basic question is, does Fund 818 include 818-2665 and 2667, or are those additional?
Yeah, I think that's an important question.
I'll ask that, but I know most of the funds, there weren't like more additional on there, but I will ask that because that is a good point.
I mean, one aspect you're probably aware is that the Army is already given the city notice they're going to terminate their lease on the Lower Presidio by August of 2024 or before that. We're involved with it because the Old Monterey Foundation has done all those improvements there. So they're going to terminate that lease. I mean, there's a lot of unanswered questions there, and our subcommittee of the Old Monterey Foundation is trying to work with Congressman Panetta's office. Does that mean, are they still going to leave the Lower Presidio open to the public? Are they going to have the Presidio Museum open? Right now, that doesn't cost much to operate it because that's all volunteers. And we've gone on record and asked Hans, the city manager, to strongly, regardless of who owns it. I mean, if the Army owns it, please keep it open to the public and please keep the Presidio Museum open. So.
I agree because we have nowhere to put any of that in the collections in there.
Do we know what the motivation of the Army is? Why are they doing this?
The Army is saying that the Army wrote a letter in 2021 saying you got to solve the erosion problem with the gophers and the Native American remains going over the hill. And the
Yeah,
Army gave them a year and they said, you haven't resolved it. So we're terminating the lease. And they put in an interesting phrase there. You're in violation of the lease and there are other needs of the Army for that property.
That's what I'm wondering. Must be more.
But nobody says what those are. And of course, the property zone, open space, when we put in walkways, we almost had to super elevate the walkways so you couldn't touch underneath the walkway. So the only thing I've heard, John, and this is just a scuttlebutt, is that they want that as a large parking area for van pulling up to the campus. But that's, there's a lot there. They can do that right now. There's tremendous amount of paved area for parking, but I don't know. That's what our committee is trying to get out of the Army. And of course, the local guy doesn't know that this is way above his pay grade. So we're trying to talk to Congressman Panetta's office and find out what does the Army really want. And we said the Old Monterey Foundation said we'd be glad to try to help solve the erosion problem with a reasonable retaining wall, but we haven't heard back from them. We just know it goes away August 2024.
And the city's not involved in trying to put them off by saying they're going to fix the erosion problem.
The city proposed this, the Army proposed a large retaining wall on Lighthouse Curve, which would have to go through its own environmental review. I think the city proposed a small one, 3 foot high, and the Army said that's not sufficient. I'm not sure about the city that, the city, it costs a lot to maintain that property. The city has to do all the maintenance. I mean, the landscaping and the building, any of the buildings or whatever. So it's costing them. Of course, there's no revenue coming in. So I'm not sure if the city.
Can I remind the commissioners that we can't speak too much on items that aren't on the
No, it's just
on the
a
consent
comment.
calendar.
I just wanted to let you know the Lower Presidio is going away from the city.
We can always have presentations at a later time when we put it on the agenda.
Okay, thank you, Brian.
I
Okay.
do, is there, to check for public comments right now?
Sure.
So if there is anyone who would like to make a public comment, you can raise your Zoom hand or dial *9 if you are connected by phone. There is a caller ending with 722. You are unmuted. And you can dial *6 to unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, so my name is Elizabeth, and I'm a student. I am actually going to school to work in museums, and eventually I hope to be a curator. And I just really wanted to comment that if Colton Hall were to close, I think that would be a real tragedy for the city. In addition to somebody pointing out that it goes against the city code, I think it was, where it's supposed to be open 7 days a week and it's currently not fulfilling its legal obligation to do so. I really want to underscore the ethical responsibility that the city has to its collections and its community, both in terms of local history, California history, but also United States history.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That is it.
Okay. Any further comments on that issue? Then we can move on to council member comments.
No comments. No comments.
John,
No comment.
Mike? Bill?
The only one I had is, if you didn't, the April 15th block party in combination with Joe Moore Day by Monterey History and Art, in combination by the plein air artists with Old Monterey Foundation, was a tremendous success. We just had a follow-up meeting with the Museum of Art. They're already looking at next year to expand it. They got, it was just a tremendous daytime and nighttime event.
Yeah.
And they're looking at either expanding it maybe down Polk Avenue or including Pacific Street.
Tim?
Very good.
All right. Well, thank you all. And with that, I will declare the meeting adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.